bombs are screaming, we always holler back to 'em.
Some of the things I'm going to talk to you about tonight are very complex, but they need to be understood and appreciated. And I want to say thank you because of many of the people here in this room. Many of you have written to me, some of you have written to your elected leaders. You've called attention to this issue of Common Core. And there's a lot of confusion around Common Core. There's still a lot of confusion around where the state board is with it. So tonight, this is not a political speech. I'm going to be very academic, to be quite frank with you, about where we're at with things, about how we're approaching this evaluation, what the statute says, exactly what has happened at the state board, because I have to tell you, I am not used to being someplace publicly where every time I turn around there's a camera in my face. No offense to the gentleman who's filming today. But I kid you not, when I'm sitting at the state board meetings, literally every TV station, photographer for newspapers, you can't see them they're out of your line of sight, but they're just there snapping pictures. And I had my first experience, I talk with my hands. I don't know if there's any fellow hand talkers in the room. I'm trying to learn not to talk with my hands. There was a picture in the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette that terrified me. Looked like I was pointing my finger at the chest of Superintendent Ritz. And the silly thing about that was we were on a recess break, just to kind of tell you how the media sensationalizes things. They were so wanting to draw that our meetings were contentious and that we were fighting. And if you watch the meetings, you watch 4 hours of basically people getting work done, and you see 15 seconds of a disagreement, and they capture that and all of a sudden explodes. But if you saw that picture, anybody see that picture, by the way? It's okay. If you saw it, trust me, I saw it. It terrified me. But we were having a recess break, and we were working on actually A to F, which is our improvement ratings for schools and school corporations. And I actually have a really good working relationship with Superintendent Ritz. We sit side by side, and we were in a recess talking about if we take action, do we promulgate a rule? We were trying to make sure, and she said something about the statute. I said something about the statute, and I happened to look past her, and I saw it sitting on her table, and I did exactly that, like, hey, it's right there. Long enough to hear click, 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 click. And when you're having a serious conversation, it doesn't mean you're mad. But sometimes when you have a serious conversation, you look very kind of somber. They snapped that and ran that on the front page of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. And Friday, I couldn't help but laugh. I was at one of your schools on Friday visiting, and some of the teachers felt they needed to walk me through the teacher's room, and on the bulletin board in the teacher's lounge was a big blown-up picture of me going like this. The only interesting thing was 2 weeks later, I noticed that in the paper there was one of Superintendent Ritz pointing at somebody. So, the funniest part of that was that this is a true story. I was at the Principals Association meeting. I was speaking, and Governor Pence was scheduled to speak behind me, and he does have a little bit of a sense of humor. He came around the corner when he saw me, he went like this. He just kind of smiled and encouraged me. That probably won't be my last bad picture in the paper if you serve in the public at all. But I share that with you just to say I'm not here to lob bombs at anybody. I'm here to ask for you to make sure that you're aware of what's going on. I think the way that we help our democracy work is to be well informed. And I'm going to try and do that for you today. I'm going to walk you through some things I think are really critical. This issue is standards. I cannot stress to you how important it is. On one level, this is an academic exercise of making sure that we evaluate our standards and we clarify at every grade level what it is that students need to be able to know and do for two reasons. Number one is we have students that will matriculate through our education system and want to head into a four-year degree program. We want that to happen too. But is anybody right now, are you aware of right now the number of students have to be remediated in their freshman year that are simply coming out of our system totally unprepared for a four-year degree? It is appalling. It is an issue that has to be addressed. We cannot stay on that course. And the thing that saddens me, and I work in higher ed, is when you see 75% of your students graduating from college with about $25,000 in debt, and you realize part of that debt is accumulated because of the number of students that have to be remediated, that's unacceptable. And then the second issue, and you're hearing Governor Pence talk a lot about this, is that we have a 7.3% unemployment rate, which frankly is on its way down. It was as high as 8.5 when I came on the state board last summer. But for every 5 jobs that we have about 3 of those 5 jobs that we can't fill right now because we lack highly skilled individuals who could matriculate right out of high school with the right set of skills and go into some of those jobs who don't need to move on to a 4-year degree program. They may need 2 years. We may need to rethink that. And that's where this concept of college and career readiness comes from, which you've heard that term, I'm sure, college and career readiness. So what does it mean? Well, we're working through a definition on that, but in a nutshell, I mean, the whole concept of college readiness is that you're ready to go to college without having to remediate or repeat courses that you should have had, and skills and knowledge and skills, prerequisite knowledge and skills that you should have already had before you got to college. Career readiness is this concept that you're able to seamlessly make the transition into the workforce without having to go through a bunch of retraining and redevelopment. But all that starts from the standards. But here's in Indiana why it becomes essentially important. Our assessment system, our accountability system of schools, how we pay teachers, everything comes back to the foundation of what we want students to know and do. And that's what a standard does. But I don't know if you were watching. In 2007 when Common Core came, and I'm not going to bore you with a lecture on the history of Common Core. Many of you can repeat it better than I can. But here's where it got kind of interesting. If you watch what was going on in Indiana, in about 2007, you had some Republican governors that started the National Governors Association that were seeing a phenomenon, and many things started out well-intentioned. And that was to say, can we look at states, if we find a way to set a kind of a baseline of standards, particularly in math and English, where we want students to thrive toward and eventually be able to show mastery. That sounds all well and good, but if you watch what's happened with that over particularly the last 2 to 3 years, you can see what has happened is that we've put around that this idea of, well, we're going to assess it with a national test. It now becomes a national curriculum. It really raised questions about whether or not we retain our sovereignty. And I'm going to tell you, those are genuine concerns that when I came on the state school board, I had many of the same questions. Because when I watched this go play out in Indiana, I don't know if you realize it, in 2010, the State Board of Education in Indiana actually adopted the Common Core state standards as the actual academic standards. We were well on our way towards the ARC assessment. It looked like sort of something happening that was going to take place, so much so that we have kind of a new issue in Indiana, in that we only have enough ISTEP test items for one more year, because in 2010, when they adopted Common Core, the thinking was by the time we got to the fall of 2015, we'd be doing the PARC assessment, so we don't need CTP McGraw-Hill after that. So it's kind of interesting to see how all that kind of unfolded. The sad part was, from my standpoint, I'd been in education in Indiana and the state for 20 years. I'd never seen us go through a standards process where we did not have a set of public hearings where we actually talked about the standards publicly. And instead, what happened in 2010 was is if you wanted to comment, you had to do it electronically, and you had to do it at the national level, basically submit your remarks. And 164 bless their heart Hoosiers were kind enough to comment, but basically in the state of Indiana, there was no hearing, there was no Hoosiers evaluating standards, and it just all kind of happened very quickly. And we were on the fast track. Fast forward to this year, we have a different changed election. I think groups such as the 912 and the Tea Party groups around the state started drawing attention to Common Core, and some of the more, I think, certainly some of the more issues that bothered me about what the national government might or might not do with nationalized standards. As that began to come to light, you influenced the legislature to pass House Enrolled Act 1427, which is what you see on the screen and what we're going to talk about. This was an important statute. This is what we refer to in the state of Indiana as the Common Core Pause Bill. And it says some very important things in it that became the source of a major debate on the State Board of Education this past fall. One of the things it says is this. It says, number one, we're not going to continue down this path until we stop and do a comprehensive evaluation of Common Core. And HE 1427 actually says that the department will conduct an evaluation of the Common Core and submit a report to the state school board by July 1st of 2013. I came on the state school board July 17th of 2013, and when I received that report and I looked at it, and this is not political, but this is a professional judgment. I have a doctorate in curriculum development and design. I can tell you right now, I did not receive an evaluation. What I got was a chronology of how we got to Common Core. That is not the same thing as a comprehensive evaluation where you're having subject matter experts that hold doctorates in math and English looking at the standards and saying, at every grade level, what is the basics of what students need to know, which is cognitive, and what do they need to be able to do, which is what we refer to as the affective domain. Okay, so for every grade level, what do we want students to know and do? Instead, I got this nice accounting of how we got to the Common Core, and it basically laid it at the feet of the previous state superintendent, who was moving on a fast track to secure a federal waiver for the state of Indiana so we could get out from underneath the No Child Left Behind and open up federal dollars through our Title I and through our ESEA entitlement grants. And I'm not here to judge whether that should or shouldn't have happened, but the side effect of that was we started down a path we'd never gone down before in Indiana, where basically we were handing over the evaluation of our state standards to somebody from outside of the state of Indiana. And that greatly concerned me. So I began asking questions right away about, well, what does House Enrolled Act 1427 say? It says in addition to the department doing evaluation, there'll be a financial basically a financial report study done by the Office of Business and Management. And that study was done to look at what are the costs of the standards, what does it cost us to do the assessments, and you can get your hands on that. But something a lot of people miss is on page 8 and 9, and it says this. It says that the State Board of Education shall conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the Common Core. Now, I don't know how you read that, but as a member of the State Board of Education, when it says that the State Board of Education will conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the Common Core, that's what I expected to see happen. And the second I started asking questions about it, I started getting stonewalled by people and basically being told, yeah, well, we're not going to put that on the agenda. And you saw some of that playing out. And it was basically the frustration you saw going on board meetings was people like me saying, I really want to talk about this. I'm reading a statute. It's not just me thinking, hey, it's a good idea for us to do an evaluation. That statute says that the State Board of Education has a statutory obligation to evaluate those standards, and I want to know how we're going to do it. And then I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm being told, well, the department's already started its own standards review. And we're getting classroom practitioners involved, and later on we're going to have some higher ed folks look at it, and we've got a process, and it's got multiple tiers to that. And I kept saying, that's fine. I would love to know more about that. Perhaps we could talk about it. Maybe we could put it on the agenda. It never would find its way on the agenda. We got into issues of having to get ADF data out, and again, I wish I could unpack all this, and maybe we'll have time in the Q&A to talk a little bit more about it, but a lawsuit was brought against the state board over the issue of the fact that we were trying to get preliminary letter grades out to schools so that they could make some determinations for parents, or let parents make some determinations on whether or not they felt like their schools were moving in the right direction. And we had done this in years past where we would embargo the data out to districts. We'd give them a chance to take a look at it, and then the board would actually issue preliminary grades and allow for an appeal period. We weren't getting anywhere on that, and the board opted to send a notification to legislative leadership saying, if you want this done, you better think about having legislative services, get into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Ed and get this out. It's not going to get done. That was the basis of a lawsuit, and when that happened, communication stopped. There was no communication. I couldn't get a conversation because it was really strange. I had never been in an environment where I woke up one day and found myself being sued, 3 meetings in as a state board member, but I couldn't even have a conversation with the state superintendent because she was the one suing us. And that basically brought conversation to a grinding halt. This lawsuit got tossed out. About November the 2nd, I got a call from Superintendent Red saying, let's talk about this review process because we've already started it. We're moving well on it. We think we're in good shape. And you know, normally, I don't believe it's the role of the board members to micromanage what happens at the department. They are 2 separate entities, and I think that's part of the confusion. The department is responsible for enforcing statute and enforcing rule, and the state board is a policy-setting body. And I don't think we are there. I mean, that's why we elected a state superintendent. That person is to enforce policy. So I respect that. But we have a little bit of an interesting dynamic in that Indiana is only one of 2 states in the union where the state superintendent chairs the State Board of Education. So on one hand, our state superintendent is the chief state school officer enforcing policy. But on the other hand, she is the 11th voting member of a policy-setting body that's a separate entity, statutorily set apart under IC 20-9-2, totally separate from the Department of Ed. And if you read that statute, you're going to find out it's the State Board of Education that establishes the goals, the policies, and directions, and it's the job of the department to go enforce it. And I've said this to Superintendent Red several times. I feel sorry because at one level she has to enforce it, but then she has to pivot and chair the state board, which is a collective of 11 people made up of 10 governor appointees and the elected state superintendent of public instruction. So I can understand, from that, I'm not trying to be excited. I can truly understand the challenge of doing that. But that being said, when you read House Enrolled Act 1427, it says the state board shall conduct a comprehensive evaluation. So we began talking about that on November the 2nd, and I suggested, with my background, I really believe we need to see what's going on. And so I was told that we would discuss it at the November 8th board meeting. It was put on the agenda for the November 8th board meeting, and as our meetings were running very long. We got to the end, and we ran out of time on it. And I knew that was going to happen because I've been watching the clock run out. Every time this issue came up, I'm watching the clock run out, and I'm starting to get really concerned because I'm sitting there doing the math, and I'm going, we have to adopt these by July 1st of 2014. But we cannot wait till July 1st because we don't have enough test items left to assess the standards. So we really need to get this done by no later than April so that there's time to figure out what we're going to do for the assessment. And you have to keep in mind that was going on at the same time that our governor and our state superintendent just announced we were not going to be doing PARCC, which I think was the right move. But we weren't going to be doing I-STEP either because McGraw-Hill runs out at the end of next school year. There is no more I-STEP after that unless we put out another call for tests, and who knows what will happen to that. We're not even at that point yet. But we got to get the standards figured out because the standards is kind of like the cart and the horse. The standards of the horse. You got to get the standards figured out, then you design your assessment, then you can figure out the rest of A to F, but you got to get the standards right. It's your foundational building block. So I'm going, this is a pretty important conversation. When are we going to have it? And when it didn't happen on the 8th, I specifically asked in the public meeting, not once but twice, can I please work with board staff and put together a resolution that clarifies what the board's responsibilities are under 1427? And twice, you can go watch the video, twice basically we were told, yes, that's fine, go do that, and I did. And despite what you hear in the media and what's said in press conferences, over that weekend I worked extremely hard with board staff to construct a resolution that's really a 2-page document that just reiterates what the statute calls for in 1427. It says we have to do statutorily as a board to do a comprehensive evaluation of the Common Core. And there were 4 things that we set out in there to resolve. Number 1 was basically this. We said that one of the things we want to have happen is we don't want to wait till the end to bring in the university subject matter experts. We want the university subject matter experts in there right now. I have a doctorate in curriculum instruction. That does not qualify me to look at a math standard. I can tell you how the standards put together. I can train teachers in how to take the standard and write a lesson plan. You don't want me helping your child with math homework. I'm going to tell you that right now, okay? You need a math expert to look at a standard and say, what is it foundationally? Because math is very developmental. And one of the issues I personally have with Common Core is that when you start to look at the standards, particularly at the youngest grade levels, there was such a passion to move higher order thinking down into the youngest grade levels because Lord knows college begins in kindergarten. No, it doesn't. A little sarcasm there. Hope that's okay. We started doing abstract reasoning things before you do concrete sequential. Now that makes no sense. You need the concrete sequential and you build off that towards abstract reasoning. I mean, that's just basic brain theory learning 101. But it's a problem because in their passion and zeal to say, we need, for 21st century learners, they're going to have to be able to think critically. Yeah, well, you know what? I got a newsflash. Kindergarten begins in kindergarten. And give them a chance, and God wired them beautifully, and they have this wonderful little way. By the time they become 2nd and 3rd graders, they can start to handle more abstract things. And guess what? As a former 5th grade teacher, it's a great grade level because they're able to really start thinking critically, and they're still small enough you can take them out, right? I can say that I taught 5th grade for 5 years, loved it. So I couldn't do middle school. I've always said there's going to be a special place in heaven for middle school teachers. But there's some issues in there, and I wanted to know how we're going to evaluate that. So we had agreement that we were going to bring a resolution back that would basically spell out. So one of the things that resolution says is get subject matter experts involved early on. Second thing it says is this. It says that we need to create expert panels, and we need to empower them to do a couple things. Number 1, they have to evaluate Common Core because that's not an option. That's required in the statute. But what the statute did not say, and this is what we were advocating for, is we had these previous standards that had been evaluated by the Fordham Institute. And if you know anything about this, the 2008 English standards got a perfect 10 out of 10 score. You know what Common Core got from Fordham, going through the same evaluation? About an 8.2, 8.5 out of 10. Yeah, so we went from a 10 in the 2008 evaluation by Fordham to adopting the 2010 National Common Core, which had a worse rating than what we had previously, okay? And I'm sort of scratching my head going, does that bother anybody? Because it kind of bothers me. Should we go back and look at the previous standards? If Fordham says they were better standards, did anybody bother to look at them and say, hey, are these college and career ready? Because there's nothing magical about that. The only thing that constitutes something being college and career ready is if you have subject matter experts look at it and say, yes, with my English PhD, I believe that to be college and career ready. I mean, I hate to make light of it, but that's basically what the feds have said. The federal government in the U.S. DOE waiver process has basically said, here's how you prove college and career readiness. Option A is adopt Common Core and don't ask any questions. Option 2 is get a state-level group of subject matter experts and have them certify them as college and career readiness. And I'm saying, why didn't we just send those standards out? Everybody at that time thought we were moving on the right track. Fordham certainly thought we had good standards. And in 2009, similar kind of thing with the math standards. We had a draft set of math standards that were approved and never implemented because by the time it wrapped up being approved, we were already moving to adopt Common Core. So we didn't even have a chance to field test the 2009 math standards. So the resolution says that in addition to doing the evaluation on Common Core, we are directing the evaluation panels to go back and look at the 2008 standards and the 2009 standards. And the third thing we said in that same aspect of that resolution is if a group of subject matter experts look at it, and once you take all the bias and all the embedded pedagogy and all the other stuff they shove into a standard, and you get it back to what a student's supposed to know and do, if we're still not satisfied that we have the best quality standard, then we empower the education expert panels to either develop it locally or go find one that fits it. But when we're done, we want to know that we have Indiana standards at every grade level that we believe will best prepare a child to either go on and attain a four-year college degree or go right into the workforce. And so that was very different because what had been happening, and I can tell you this because at the request of Superintendent Ritz, I went and met with department staff. What they were doing is they had found K-12 teachers from around the state, and they were sending them the Common Core standards, and they were giving them a graphic organizer, a little worksheet, with some open-ended questions saying, how do you feel about these standards at your grade level? And when I met with the department, I'm looking at responses like you would expect to see, saying, I kind of like that standard, but we could use some more resources to teach that, or we'd like to have clarity around such and such. And it's not that those things aren't important, because some of the teachers were, in fact, saying, I'm not real sure that it's real smart for us to teach this way at grade 1 in math, because we know that by grade 3 and grade 4, they have to be able to do it. So there was some good feedback, but that is not the same thing as a comprehensive evaluation of the standards. In my opinion, as somebody who has a curriculum background, that's not an evaluation. It's not the same thing as bringing math experts and English experts in to say, what is it we want kids to know and do? That resolution also, and this is what became part of the rub, actually said that we want board staff to lead on the process. It's not that we don't want the department involved, but we want to make it clear that 1427 sets apart a separate evaluation process apart from the department. It says the board will do a comprehensive evaluation. And this actually became the trigger that shut down the meeting on November the 13th. If you were watching that and you saw the big storm out and Oliver's resolution shuts it down. I never dreamed that was going to happen because I'd actually taken steps to go to the department to listen to what the department had to say. I even changed the resolution over the weekend to incorporate some of the input I got from department staff. When we got in on the 13th, the only thing I knew was that Superintendent Ritz wanted the department to make a presentation on their process. I sat through that, expressed what my concerns were that the board needed to do its own evaluation, and I introduced the resolution. And at that point, we had a motion and a second and was told that the resolution was improper. And I was like, improper? And what was explained to us in the public board meeting, go back and watch the tape, is that the attorneys at the department had basically pulled the statute and was reading from a section of the statute that says that every 6 years the department will do a review of the standards. And it does say that. Every 6 years, you may or may not know this, the department's supposed to go through and reevaluate standards in each of the content areas. And I tried to express during that meeting, I don't believe what I'm bringing forward in the resolution is in conflict because this is a very specific statute that goes beyond that recurring requirement that you review standards and says you will go evaluate the Common Core state standards. But by 3 o'clock that afternoon, after we had shut the meeting down, there was a press conference, and I'm now hearing for the first time that my resolution might be illegal. And I'm going, what? My mother watches this stuff. Are you kidding me? I don't sit around doing illegal stuff. I just want to do an evaluation of the Common Core state standards. That's what that law says. And we were told in that press conference that our state superintendent felt it was illegal. It was going to the Attorney General for a ruling. Long story short, to catch you up, and then I want to take you and show you the process that we're working on now because it's a totally different. We've done an about phase so much so that I feel like sometimes I'm in the twilight zone, which is a good thing in this particular instance because on November the 13th, we shut the meeting down and said, this is illegal, we can't do this. We then had an Attorney General's opinion, legal advisory opinion on the resolution on December 6th that says, oh, it's perfectly legal. It's exactly what the statute says. You've got to do an evaluation. She didn't see a lot of press coverage about that. You probably also didn't see a lot of press coverage on December the 20th. Superintendent Ritz joined us in voting for the resolution that just the month before we said was illegal. So we all voted. Everybody's happy. Went to Christmas. It was great. And it was also the week where I heard through the grapevine, everybody's freaking out. We were going to strip her of her power because they saw in the meeting agenda we were going to vote on meeting procedures. Little did they know we had been working behind the scenes with the NASB consultant, which is the National Association of School Board of Educators, to set up some meeting procedures. I don't know about you, but this isn't my first rodeo with a school board. I've been in central office of 2 different districts, Republican, Democrat. I've seen some boards almost come to the point where you had to bring law enforcement in and separate them. Our meetings have never been that contentious, first of all. But I've never been in a meeting where you try to operate without a clear set of meeting procedures on how you move motions and bring agenda items. I mean, you've got to have some basic rules. I hope you would agree with that. But there was not going to be any fireworks. But boy, you thought coming into the December 20 meeting, we were going to have this big firestorm, and the press was like, it's going to be a showdown. And I'm thinking, like, Friday, shut up. It's going to be, there was a motion a second. We adopted procedures. It was a calm meeting. And it was so calm that I don't think anybody noticed that the resolution that was so controversial on November 13th was passed with flying colors. Last week at the meeting, during superintendent input, and was very appreciative, was very kind and very gracious. I was thanked publicly for my leadership on this. So I thought, okay, we're getting there. We had another really good meeting. We got the meeting done in an hour. There's some positive things happening. But in all seriousness, this is still a very important issue that you need to understand, because we now seem to be working together, and that's really important. The kids are going to benefit from that. Because at the end of the day, let me tell you, this is not Republican or Democrat. I'm a passionate teacher at heart. I always have been. I'm an educator. I got 3 kids in the system. I want to get this right. We have pushed education reform at lightning speed, and I'm not slamming that. Some of that reform is badly needed. We were for years accepting status quo that we shouldn't have been. It was time to shake it up. But I want to be fair, and I want to make sure we do it right, because in the end, it's our children. They're going to basically benefit from the work that we do. And this is a very foundational piece. So with that, I want to kind of take you in and kind of show you what's going on here and how we're approaching this. You all know there was an interim study committee this summer by the legislature, right? They couldn't reach any formal recommendations really in terms of a direction whether to adopt or not adopt Common Core, but they had some very specific things to say, and it won't surprise you. And I'm very grateful for folks like Scott Schneider and Dennis Cruz and Bob Banning and others who basically said, we're going to give you some guidance, State School Board, but number one thing, can we tell you, you are to retain Indiana sovereignty. And I got to tell you, I'm very grateful. We heard that loud and clear from the governor, because it wasn't in the state of address. That wasn't the first time I heard the governor say standards by Hoosiers for Hoosiers. I heard it up in here in Fort Wayne back in the early fall. I don't know where he was at, but I know he was up here and it was covered by the press, and he was very adamant then, let's get this right. And so we've been off and working on that, but here's a couple underlying assumptions about the process, because the process is being led by the state board now. Board staff, which are housed in the Center for Education and Career Innovation, are working in concert with the department staff to get 2 subject matter panels put together. I'm anticipating probably at our February 5th meeting, you're going to see the board take action on affirming the membership of those evaluation panels. I can't sit here tonight and tell you who the names are. I'm not going to disclose names. I don't even frankly know where they're at right now, because they've been working on it for 2 weeks trying to get it right. But they're going through right now, and they're looking for qualified people. I do know they've had some subject matter experts recommended to them by groups like this, and they're going through that, and they'll put those together and we'll affirm them. I do anticipate seeing separate evaluation panels for math and language arts. That's a given. You got to have that. You need to have some people that know something about math leading that. I don't think it'll all be subject matter experts. I think there'll be some classroom teachers. I think there'll probably be, I think the resolution allows for a national expert. And when I say national expert, before anybody gets real objected to that, there's also something to be said for this articulation process between grade levels, and having somebody with a background in math at a national level. We've heard of, I think, Dr. Stotsky. Is it Stotsky? And we have some national people that actually really know what they're doing. It allows for that. It also allows for us to have parents. What a concept. I think there's an idea that we probably think about, parents, community members, some other voices to that panel. But the idea is that you've got a panel looking at math, panel looking at language arts.
Hunkered in the sand, middle of nowhere. The war was raging, and he didn't think he'd be spared. He told his buddy, "Guess this is the end." His buddy looked at him, said, "Don't say